You're just an outdated old man, Marcus. This company doesn't need fossils holding us back. She didn't even flinch when she said it, just flicked her pen like dismissing a man was routine to me. Name's Marcus Hale. I'm 58. For nearly 2 decades, I served as the logistics director at Cascade Aerosystems, a mid-sized aviation firm based in Seattle, Washington. Not the loudest guy in the room. Never chased titles. I was the guy who knew every bolt, every supplier, and every storm delay before it hit the news. The guy who kept the planes moving. So when Alina Carrington, the newly minted CEO with 6 months in the role, and a LinkedIn page longer than her resume, looked me dead in the eye and called me obsolete, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. I didn't argue. I didn't demand a reason. I stood, shook her hand coldly, and walked out. As I packed up 18 years of precision and trust into a cardboard box, the younger team couldn't even look at me. I trained half of them, built the entire logistics framework they now rely on. And yet, in that sterile, glass-walled conference room, I had become invisible until they'd feel the void I left behind. Cascade Aerosystems wasn't built in a boardroom. It started in a leaky hangar on the edge of Tacoma's industrial strip in 1979, when Gerald Dawson, a Vietnam vet with a busted knee and a dream, welded surplus parts together and sold his first cargo drone. He built a $60 million empire from that single rusted rig with no venture capital or exit strategy. Just grit and reputation. When his health declined, Gerald handpicked me to run operations. "You're the only one I trust not to cut corners," he once told me. That stuck with me. Now here we were, 4 decades later, and Gerald's nephew, Asher Dawson, fresh off a Stanford MBA and 3 years in Silicon Valley, was calling the shots. He wasn't malicious, just dangerously naive, obsessed with scalability, AI integrations, and disrupting legacy workflows. Code words, really, for tearing out everything that worked. And to him, I was the last dinosaur blocking progress. But what he didn't know, what no one in that newly polished leadership suite even bothered to research, was that my contract held a clause Gerald himself had written, one that would turn their blind ambition into a costly mistake. As I drove away from Cascade's sleek new headquarters, a glass and metal monument to innovation, I didn't speed or curse. I turned onto the I-5 and headed home, back to my quiet 2-story in West Seattle, where the walls still echoed a life that had meant something. I set the box of belongings on my kitchen table and opened the drawer where I kept a red file folder marked, "Just in case." Inside was a copy of my employment contract. Page 7, Section 14, Paragraph B. In the event of termination without documented cause, the employee shall be entitled to severance, equating to 24 months of their current salary, including bonuses. Gerald's doing. He added that clause when I turned down an offer from a larger competitor 12 years ago. "You're not a piece of equipment I'm willing to lose," he had told me. I never forgot that. That afternoon, I called Nathan Rigg, my longtime friend, and an attorney, quietly waiting for Cascade's arrogance to catch up with itself. "This is airtight," he said after reviewing the document. "We don't need to go to war, just present the paperwork." As I hung up the phone, the house felt unusually still. My wife, Helen, had passed 5 years earlier, after a brutal fight with leukemia. We'd been married for 27 years. She was my compass. And when she died, work became my anchor. I built structure into chaos at home and on the factory floor, raised 2 kids who'd long since charted their paths. My son, Drew, a naval architect in San Diego, and my daughter, Mia, who teaches high school math in Boulder. Solid kids. Independent thinkers. Helen would have been proud. I walked out back to the small maple tree Helen and I planted when we first bought the house, a scrawny twig back then, now tall and strong. We'd wrapped copper wire around it once after a windstorm nearly split the trunk. I gave it structure and support. That's what I'd done at Cascade. Reinforced something fragile until it stood on its own. But now, they thought they didn't need that support anymore. And that was fine. They also didn't realize that removing the foundation doesn't make the building stronger. It just makes the collapse more spectacular. The first signal that the ground beneath Cascade Aerosystems was shifting came quietly. The kind of shift you don't see until your footing's already gone. It was a board meeting last spring. One I wasn't invited to, though I'd helped prepare half the agenda. When I asked around, I was told it was strategy. Only. That was code for, you're not part of the future. Not long after that, Asher Dawson began making regular appearances on the production floor not to learn, but to observe as if he were studying an alien organism. He brought a trail of consultants and ex-tech bros who discussed leaning into efficiencies and phasing out non-digital redundancies. I once caught one of them, snapping photos of our aging assembly line like it was a crime scene. Every week, something changed. Long-trusted vendors were dropped. Our domestic parts contracts, painstakingly built on 3 decades of mutual reliability, were replaced with flashy offshore bids that looked good in spreadsheets and crumbled in real-world timelines. When I confronted Asher, he smiled like I was a well-meaning but irrelevant uncle. We have to modernize, Marcus. That's where the market's headed. But it wasn't modernization, it was surgical dismantling. A slow, deliberate purge of what Gerald had spent his life building. What we had all poured ourselves into. And the worst part? Gerald saw it happening. He didn't say much. Not at first. He just sat silently at meetings, his hands trembling slightly, when no one was looking. He was 78 then, heart condition worsening. But his mind was still sharp. Too sharp to miss what was unfolding, and too proud to stop it. One afternoon, he came by my office unannounced. His voice was tired, his steps slower than I remembered. He closed the door behind him, sat across from me, and placed a manila folder on the table. It was the revised org chart. At the top, Asher Dawson, CEO. My name wasn't on it. I made him promise to keep the core team, Gerald said, unable to meet my eyes. Said he'd need your experience. I believed him. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. His betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, reluctant, and heavy with resignation. 2 weeks later, Gerald officially stepped down. The press release painted it as a graceful retirement. Internally, it felt like a funeral without a casket. From that day forward, Cascade wasn't the same. The soul had left the building, and in its place stood something shinier, colder, and infinitely more breakable. 3 days after being quietly shoved out the door, I found myself back in the city, not at Cascade's sleek headquarters, but in a marble-floored law office in downtown Seattle, seated across from a pair of faces that couldn't look more out of place in a legal setting. One belonged to Asher Dawson, barely 30, still tan from a Bali strategy retreat, his jaw tight with impatience. The other, a fresh-faced corporate attorney named Gavin Trent, looked like he'd studied more case law than real-world contracts. Next to me sat Nathan Rigg, my attorney, and longtime friend 67, former federal prosecutor, now semi-retired but still sharp as a scalpel. His worn leather briefcase sat open, and the copy of my contract was placed squarely in front of him, highlighted and tabbed like a court exhibit. Mr. Hale, Gavin began, we appreciate you coming in. But to be clear, Cascade has no obligation to provide severance in this case. This was a strategic leadership shift. Nathan didn't flinch. He slid the contract forward and tapped the yellow highlighted section with a capped pen. Section 14, paragraph B, he said coolly. Termination without cause specifically defined in Appendix D requires 24 months compensation. We're talking $312,000, plus accrued PTO and stock options, all vested. Asher scoffed. He was resisting direction, dragging teams back into analog systems. That's the cause. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Then where's the documentation? Written warnings? A performance improvement plan? Anything? Gavin flipped open an empty slim folder, just a printed org chart and a few Slack screenshots that proved nothing. Silence followed, thick and awkward. Asher's confidence cracked. We'll offer 6 months, he said flatly. That's generous. Nathan didn't blink. We'll file. Discovery should be fun, especially considering Mr. Hale wasn't the only employee over 50 terminated that week. That made Gavin sit straighter. Then Asher leaned in. His voice dropped to register like he'd practiced this line in the mirror. You're 58, Marcus. Let's be real. Where else are you gonna go? Do you think anyone wants a dinosaur in aerospace these days? Before I could respond, the door opened. And for the first time in months, I saw Gerald Dawson thinner, grayer, leaning on a cane, but eyes burning. Asher, he said sharply. Out. Now. The room fell into stunned silence. Asher started to protest. But Gerald cut him off with a look that froze time. This conversation is over. He turned to me. Marcus, I'm sorry. This isn't how things should have ended. I nodded. No bitterness. Just the truth. I stood, shook Nathan's hand, and left. The building behind me gleamed with hollow power, but I had something more solid, the law, the truth, and a growing list of people ready to follow me into whatever came next. The severance landed in my account a week later. $312,000. Clean. No NDA. No apology. No contact. I stared at the transaction on my phone for a long while. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. A door had slammed shut, but something else, quieter, had opened. That same afternoon, I sat across from Tommy Salazar, former head of systems integration at Cascade, in the back booth of a rundown diner in Renton. It was 2:47 p.m. The place smelled like burnt coffee and fried regret. Tommy stirred his drink with the tip of a butter knife, then finally said, They offered me 9-month severance with strings. 5 years of silence. Can't talk about proprietary design, tech stacks, vendor pipelines. Sounds like hush money, I said. He snorted. Sounds like theft of memory. I reached into my coat pocket and slid a card across the table. Alec Morrow, Pacific Dynamics, independent manufacturer. They are still building their new propulsion division. Quietly. No NDA. Tommy looked at the card like a grenade with the pin half out. Cascade'll sue. Not if we're working with General Systems, I said. Nothing proprietary. Just industry, standard applications. He nodded slowly, the fight starting to flicker behind his eyes again. Over the next 2 weeks, I made 6 more calls. Engineers, programmers, vendors, procurement veterans, people Cascade thought were too expensive, too cautious, too analog. But these weren't relics, they were architects. The ones who kept the floors running, the machines humming, and the clients happy. Everyone said, let me know where and when. One of those calls was to Maya Chen, head of quality assurance, or she had been until her department was folded into some algorithmic workflow. We met in the parking lot of an old bowling alley. She handed me a manila envelope without a word. Inside were internal memos from Cascade, supply delays, safety flags ignored, and clients filing formal warnings. It's unraveling already, she said. Faster than I expected. Good, I replied. Let them feel it. But this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about dignity and preserving the kind of work ethic that built Cascade in the first place. We weren't burning it all down, but creating something new from the ashes. I called Alec Morrow that Friday evening. Still interested in that conversation? I asked. He laughed. You're damn right I am. Let's talk blueprints. 3 days later, we toured an old aerospace testing facility outside Spokane. Dusty, massive, half-lit, but I saw it. I saw the bones, the airflow, the layout. I saw the future. We shook hands in the middle of the gutted hangar, our voices echoing like ghosts. That was the moment it became real. And Cascade? Well, they were too busy hiring influencers to film TikToks in their new innovation zone to notice that half their best people were walking out the door quietly, strategically, one by one. They'd notice soon enough. 2 months had passed. since Cascade wired my severance. On paper, I was retired. If I felt sociable, I could fish, read, and maybe coach a little league team, but that would never happen. I wasn't wired for stillness. I wasn't wired for revenge, either. What I was wired for was restoration. Not of a title or paycheck, but of principle. The principle that experience matters, that commitment should be honored, and that companies aren't built by pitch decks, they're built by people. I spent the first few weeks drawing out frameworks at my kitchen table. Yellow legal pads stacked up in the corner, covered in chicken scratch notes about workflow systems, procurement channels, and small batch propulsion design, the kind of work Cascade had abandoned for faster ROI models. I didn't need to invent a revolution. I just needed to build what worked and, more importantly, make it with the right people. The first person I called was Luis Trent, a materials lead I'd worked beside for over a decade. He picked up after one ring. "Marcus, still got that custom carbon weave prototype you were tinkering with last year?" He laughed. "I thought you were out of the game. I'm building something better." Long pause. Then, "Where and when?" That's how it started, one call at a time. Each conversation was its quiet reckoning. People who had been discarded without ceremony, who'd gone home with 20 years of knowledge and nowhere to apply it. People like Dana Ruiz, our calibration specialist, had spent her whole career ensuring aircraft components met tolerance within 3 decimal places. Cascade had replaced her with a digital dashboard that flagged errors but couldn't explain them. "Why now?" she asked me over coffee one morning. "Because I'm done waiting for someone else to fix it." And she nodded. That was all it took. Then came Eric Johansson, the machinist who could operate a 5-axis CNC machine like it was an extension of his body. Lisa Harrell, the procurement wizard, knew which supplier was lying about delivery times because of their email punctuation. Tommy, Maya, Kelsey, Rob. The list grew, not fast, but solid. We didn't just rebuild a team, we reassembled a soul. We found our physical space as an abandoned maintenance hangar just outside Spokane, 52,000 square feet of silence and dust, with enough history in its beams to remind us we weren't starting from scratch. We were picking up where real work had left off. Alec Morrow, our investor and quiet partner, visited the site twice a week. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need his name on the wall or a title on a card. He just wanted to see people do things the right way again. He funded our equipment acquisitions, introduced us to a few hesitant but intrigued clients, and let us run. His only condition? Respect the process. Respect the people. We called the new company Northbridge Dynamics. It was Luis's idea, because bridges hold weight, and north is where you go when you lose direction. The name stuck. While we built up the bones, the ripple effects started showing on Cascade's side. It began with whispers from the inside contacts who'd stayed behind, unable or unwilling to jump ship. Late deliveries, missed safety inspections, clients threatening to walk. One email, sent anonymously, contained a screenshot of an internal Slack thread. "We're burning senior-level hours just trying to understand systems that used to run themselves." It didn't surprise me. You can't delete legacy with a keystroke. One afternoon, I stood on our half-finished shop floor, watching a test rig slowly lift power. The hum of motors and compressed air echoed through the hangar like the whisper of something ancient competence returning. Lisa walked up beside me, tablet in hand. "We've got 3 vendors asking if we're taking overflow from Cascade." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I told them we'll be operational in 60 days. Conservative estimate." That night, I called Maya again. She was still inside Cascade, still collecting evidence, not maliciously, just vigilantly. "You're not leaking for revenge," I told her. "You're leaking because someone needs to be watching the store." "That's exactly it," she said. "The place is rotting from the core, and no one's sounding the alarm because they're all too scared of being next." I felt a chill. Not fear, but responsibility. The kind that says, if not you, who? Then came the call. Gerald Dawson. I saw his name flash on the screen just after 6 p.m. I'd just locked up the shop for the night. The sky outside was painted in that quiet gold you only get in autumn. I stared at the phone for a moment, thumb hovering. Then I picked up. "Gerald," I said. Silence. Then his voice, worn but clear. "Marcus, I need to talk." I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. "It's falling apart," he finally said. "They're cutting corners, selling off R&D assets. The board's nervous. I'm nervous. And now you call," I said without venom, just truth. "I should have listened to you. I should have stopped it before it got this far." Another pause. "I want you to come to my house. Tomorrow night. Just you and a few others. The board wants to discuss options, including leadership changes." I looked out at the shop floor and the crew slowly returning to life. People who believed in what we were building not because of a pitch deck, but because of a shared past and a new purpose. "I'll come," I said, "but I'm not promising anything." "That's fair," he replied. "And Marcus, thank you for answering." When the call ended, I stood there for a while, listening to the creak of the hangar beams in the evening wind. Something in me shifted. This wasn't about reclaiming a company anymore. It was about saving the people still trapped inside it. The ones who hadn't jumped, who couldn't jump. It was about signaling that integrity still had a voice and could win. We had built something solid, and now it was time to use it. It was precisely 6 months to the day since I'd been dismissed from Cascade. 6 months since a new regime had tried to erase everything we'd built. Now I was back. Not in anger or revenge, but in quiet authority. The boardroom looked the same. Polished glass, custom oak table, branded coffee cups, and tension so thick it hummed through the walls. But the energy had shifted. This time I wasn't seated at the margins. I was standing in the wings, waiting for a signal. Across the room, Asher Dawson sat flanked by his young executive team, all buzzwords and nervous smiles. He looked like a man who believed the storm hadn't landed yet. Gerald sat beside the board chairman, frailer now but far more present than before. His eyes flicked toward me briefly, then back to the presentation. Asher was halfway through his quarterly results, a disaster dressed in corporate language. "Revenue dip is temporary," he said. "A natural adjustment in a volatile market." But the graphs told another story, a 37% drop. 4 major clients lost, 2 pending lawsuits. Quality assurance failure rates are up 63%. The board sat stone-faced. Then he saw me. "What is he doing here?" Asher snapped, pointing like I was an intruder. "He doesn't belong in this meeting." The board chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson, the board has requested Mr. Hale's presence to clarify the next steps regarding Cascade's future leadership." Asher froze. "This is ridiculous. I'm the CEO. I have equity." Gerald stood slowly, but when he spoke, the room stilled. "You hold 20%. I retained 51% after my transition and voted for the merger proposal." Silence. I stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. "Northbridge Dynamics will absorb Cascade's custom propulsion and R&D divisions. The remainder will continue operations under new oversight." "You can't do this," Asher hissed, flipping through the documents, eyes widening as the truth set in. Behind me, Luis, Dana, and Tommy entered the room, a wall of people who'd been discarded but not forgotten. "This is a hostile takeover," Asher snapped. "No," I said calmly. "This is course correction. You'll regret this," he barked. "I'll block you from every vendor." I didn't flinch. "You already did, remember? But now we own the vendors." Gerald looked at him one last time. "The lesson here, Asher, is simple. Legacy isn't your enemy. Pride is." And just like that, it was over. 6 months after being thrown out like scrap, I stood in the heart of the company I once helped build, not as an employee or subordinate, but as the steward of its rebirth. 1 year after the merger, I stood on the second-floor catwalk of Northbridge Dynamics, overlooking the newly expanded production floor. Machines hummed precisely, operators moved with purpose, and the air buzzed not with urgency, but rhythm. We'd built this from what others discarded, not from rage but from belief, from experience, from stubborn, Old school values. Beside me, Gerald leaned on his cane, thinner now but eyes sharp. He handed me a quarterly report, margins up, employee retention solid, 3 new contracts signed just last week. We're stronger than ever, he said quietly. I watched Luis reviewing schematics with new interns. Dana inspects parts with her usual perfection. Tommy sketching blueprints with the same steady hands. The experience wasn't replaced, it was integrated. Marcus, Gerald said, smiling faintly. I never imagined that clause in your contract would end like this. I smiled back. Neither did I. Below us, the floor kept moving, efficient, alive, and honorable. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the past. I was building the future. I didn't set out to prove anything. I didn't want revenge, or headlines, or applause. What I wanted was something most people never ask for, to be respected for the work I'd already done and trusted for what I still had to give. The world moves fast, and somewhere along the way, we started confusing new with better, and young with smarter. But let me tell you, experience is not rust. It's reinforcement. What happened at Cascade wasn't just about me. It was about what happens when companies forget the people who built them. When leadership becomes performance, and strategy forgets soul. I've learned that legacy isn't built in boardrooms. It's forged on factory floors, on long nights, in quiet sacrifices nobody sees. If you're watching this, maybe you've been pushed aside. Perhaps you've been told your time is up. I'm here to tell you, it's not. You don't need permission to rebuild. You need purpose, the right people, and the courage to start again. Because at the end of the day, it's not about holding on to the past, it's about honoring it while building something more substantial.